Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is Dennis Otieno. On the previous video that we had, we talked about my journey in building a home in Kenya while in the diaspora. On that video, I showed you how I bought a piece of land in Kenya, and in that piece of land, I ended up building my dream home, right? On that video, we also covered quite a few topics. One of the key primary topics we covered was, do you need a home in Kenya? Okay. On this particular topic, we discovered some things you need to consider before you make a decision to build a home in Kenya. We went over buying versus building of a home. What are the pros and cons of each? Today, I want to talk about ways to fund your project in Kenya. However, before I get to that, I wanted to go back and revisit the first topic, which is, do you need a home in Kenya? There are a couple of important points I did not cover on that video, and I want to make sure that those points are covered. So let's go ahead and do a recap on this. So the first question that we had to ask ourselves was, what are your retirement plans? We talked about, do you plan to retire in Kenya or do you plan to retire in the United States? One area that I did not cover is, along with considering your retirement plans, you also need to consider who will supervise this project. Construction is time consuming. You are going to be in the United States. You need somebody to supervise the project for you while you are here. And even after the project is completed, who will manage the property for you? If you build an apartment complex, are you going to hire a management company to manage that for you? Are you going to hire your cousin to manage that for you? These are decisions you need to think about before you start on this journey. We talked about family ties. How strong is your family ties to Kenya? Do you have any siblings back home? Do you have any children, spouse back home, right? How often do you visit Kenya? That was another topic we went over. What's your health like? Are you generally healthy? Do you have a family history of some things that may cause you to be concerned? Because we know that healthcare in Kenya is not as good as it is over here in the United States. So you have to consider that. Another topic we discovered is, what's your age? I wanted to expand on this just a little bit. And I'm going to take a quick example here by saying, for example, let's just think about the age and the topic about ROI, right? So let's say you are in your 50s or maybe your 60s. Let's use simple numbers. You are 50 years old and you plan to build an apartment complex in Kenya. And you end up spending maybe 20 million Kenya shillings, let's say in US dollars, maybe $160,000. Just, I'm guesstimating here, or $200,000. Let's say you're building this in Nairobi. Land is expensive, and you're planning to build this apartment complex in Nairobi. So you've already spent 200,000 US dollars equivalent in building this apartment complex in Kenya. Let's say it's 20 units and the monthly outcomes gross, before you subtract management fees for people managing that property for you, before you subtract delinquencies, people that are not paying, before you subtract everything, let's say that gross, just general gross, let's say you are bringing in about, let's say $700 US, or maybe you're on the higher side, you're bringing $1,000 US, right? What I'm trying to get to here is, if you do the math, the even point, typically, you will find out that the break even point, while if you consider all good conditions, meaning everybody's paying on time, you have 100% occupancy, you'll find out that the even point tends to be about 8 to 10 years normally. If you're starting at 50, that will get you around 60 years old. And at that time, now anything that comes out of this apartment complex you build is cash flow because you've already paid off the initial investment you put into building it, right? Take that concept and let's say you want to start when you're 55 or 60 or 65, and then you realize that you may not break even in your lifetime. You may be building this maybe for your children to actually enjoy it. And hopefully your children have enough relationships in Kenya to want to manage an apartment complex in Kenya while you're in the United States or when you're gone, right? So you really need to consider break-even point. Very important. Another thing that we discussed, do you already have a home in the US? What does your spouse think about you going to, build a home in Kenya? Okay. One thing that I wanted to expand on that topic was, and it's something I've had a few times. I'm in real estate here in the US, and people talk to me, especially when they're planning to buy a home, and they always come up with this, hey, we can't afford that home, or we can't buy a home now, or this and that. And normally the story goes to, anytime, and this is probably more issue for men than women, but typically the story goes, hey, anytime I ask my husband to, to do this, or spend money here, or spend money there, is always like, we don't have the money. And yet, the moment he gets a phone call from Kenya, he's quickly sending $1,000 here, $500 there, $600 there, quickly, like almost instantly. And yet, for the home in Kenya, when the wife is saying, hey, we need to do this, we need to buy that. No, we don't have money. So this is something you need to balance. Because as I said in the previous video, it does you no good to build a fancy home or even a fancy apartment complex if you end up going to Kenya and being there by yourself. Okay. And that is something that I hear a lot. Another part of balancing the needs is you also have to figure out what is your immigration status in the US. This is very important, especially given everything that is going on in the US right now. You need to know what is your immigration status because, hey, you never know what could happen. We all don't know, right? If you end up going to Kenya and you've been in the United States maybe 20, 40, 30 years, and now you want to go back to Kenya and you want to start, where are you going to live? Where are you going to live when you go back to Kenya, right? For me, I made a decision to build my home because that also was something that concerned me, right? Where am I going to live when I go back to Kenya? When I go visiting people, I'm not comfortable with going to stay in somebody's house and then they decide to, kick their kid out to go stay in the living room so I can sleep in the kid's bedroom, right? I'm used to my comforts in the United States. I'm not comfortable sleeping in a kid's bed, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's that that's not my comfort zone. Okay. So that to me was part of the reason why I decided to build my own home so that when I take my family to Kenya and when I go to Kenya, I don't end up displacing people and disrupting their normal lifestyle because of my needs. Now, that may be different for you. Something that I know is, having been in the US for so long, where when you flip on a light switch, the light comes on. When you turn on the tap, the water comes on. and it's always there consistently. I want to have the same experience while I'm in Kenya, right? So when I bring this back to immigration, you have to be sure to consider this, because if you are not stable here and you're comfortable here and your immigration status is questionable here, maybe that's a good reason to build a home in Kenya. Because should you be sent out of this country, how are you going to live when you go back? That's a very important question. I think I've covered enough about this topic. So I'm going to skip ahead and go to our topic for the day. We went over building versus buying, the pros and cons. But today I want to cover the different types of ownerships that we have in Kenya that I see more common. Okay. Some of these ownerships that I see that are very popular in Kenya are, for example, high-rise apartments. These are growing up. They are all over YouTube. Oh my goodness, these things are beautiful. Ooh, ooh, these things are beautiful. Okay. I see a lot of this. Is that what you want to buy? You have to make that decision. But you also have to consider, if you buy in a high-rise apartment, you have to really, really know and love your neighbors. You have to ask questions. Remember the example I gave you. In the United States, you flip on a switch, the light comes on. You turn on a water tap, the water comes on. These high rises are being built in places that I don't know how long the borehole they are using to get water will last. Okay. Some of these situations you may run out of water. I don't know about you. I'm not comfortable carrying a bucket of water, 5 or 10 stairs up. But you need to consider things like this. You need to consider things like the management of the property, the security of the property. If you're buying in a high rise, remember you have connected walls. You are sharing walls with your neighbor. You don't know who's living next door. In fact, most of those apartments are bought by people in the diaspora for Airbnb purposes. So you are here living in a very, very beautiful high-rise apartment in Nairobi, fancy high-rise apartment in Nairobi. You are happy, and yet you don't have stable neighbors. People come and go every day, every night, because those are Airbnbs surrounding you. Okay. Some of them come and make noise. It's loud. You have to consider these things. Okay. You don't know you don't know who's next door. There could be an axe murderer, there could be a sex offender, yet you are living here with your family. Or maybe you bought an apartment for your parents and the people around them are always revolving because it's an Airbnb next door. So before you buy in a high-rise apartment, consider utilities, consider safety, consider management, and definitely consider, are these Airbnbs that people are buying? Very important. Another type of property that, of course, the most common one that we all aspire to have is a freestanding home, right? This is a home built in its own compound. You have your fence, kind of like what we typically have in the United States, right? Again, it goes to confirming the neighborhood association, the HOA, the management of the homes. Why am I talking about this HOA thing? This is important because if you don't know about the rules and regulations that govern the neighborhood, you may end up buying a house in a fancy neighborhood and then people start building extensions behind their houses. And now your beautiful neighborhood turns into a slum. This can happen. Ask people that bought in Buru Buru many years ago. This can happen, okay? So you really, really need to consider things like that while buying even a freestanding home, okay? Another common one that people consider is commercial building, like an apartment complex. For me, I've not done any of this. I've not built an apartment complex in Kenya, but I'm considering it. And if I was to do it, this is how I would do it. I would buy, this is a tough one, because if you bought land in Nairobi or in Kisumu or in Nakuru, one of the major cities, and you plan to live there, then either you buy a freestanding home and leave that complex just for business purposes, in which case it may not matter as much where you buy it from. But if you want to also live there, I would probably build an apartment complex, build the entire top floor as my penthouse. But then again, you have to consider when you go to Kenya, you may not be able to walk upstairs. So you may have to consider building an elevator or some kind of what people call lift, right? To be able to enjoy that high level apartment, penthouse on top of the rental units that you have. But that is if you want to be an active landlord, you want to watch your property, you want to manage your property, you also want somewhere to live within the city that you own, right? You may want to consider that. So build an apartment complex, build the entire top floor to be yours, or maybe the entire bottom floor to be yours. Your choice, whichever you're comfortable with. But I may consider doing that, especially in cities where I know that I don't want to live there permanently. If I want to go there, maybe once a month, maybe for medical checkup during my retirement, and I don't want to rent an Airbnb, and I don't want to stay in a hotel, maybe I just take one of the units in that complex and make it my own. That's another way of doing it. Another thing that I see becoming more and more popular in property ownership in Kenya is called this fractional ownership or timeshare. That's what we know it in the United States, right? I've seen this offered by some hotel chains where they allow you to, I want to call it rent, because you are really not a property owner. They say you own the property, you buy it from them for millions, and while you're away, they are renting out that property as part of the hotel chain, making money, and then they're giving you part of the profits they make, giving you back that money. So you're actually renting out the property to them. You have to be careful about this because they have restrictions, just like timeshares. If the hotel has an event and your property is rented, you can't just go to Kenya and kick the person out. So you have to pick time blocks that you're going to use the property. You pretty much have to sign up and register, almost like you have to book your own home before you get there. And they have restrictions. For example, you may own this property, but if, for example, you put a permanent tenant, let's say you have this property linked to a hotel chain, it's a fractional share, and you decide to put your mother or your father or your brother to live in it, well, you forfeit that return that they would have given you. So the profits that they would have given you from renting out that property, you don't get those. So you have to also consider that. I've seen this done a couple of times. Hey, if this is where you want to go, it's just another way of owning properties in Kenya where you generate income while you're away from the property. One that people also do is co-owners or partnerships. This is where you partner with someone and you build something and you own it together. The ownership is typically divided in shares. So whoever has the most capital, maybe gets the most profit out of that property. But I always say consider the 5 Ds. Divorce. If your partner gets divorced, now you're partnered with this wife or husband. Okay. Death. That's another D. What happens if your partner dies? Now you are tied to the partner's children or spouse or something else. What if your partner becomes disabled? That's another D, disability. Another D is what if your partner loses interest in this project? Disinterest, right? There's another D. What if you have disputes between you and your partner on how the property should be managed? I used to listen to Dave Ramsey, and one statement I liked that he used to say is, a partnership is the only ship that never sails. I'm going to repeat that. A partnership is the only ship that never sails. Personally, I'm not against partnerships. They're just not for me. And for many reasons. Because of the 5Ds, I am scared of partnerships. And personally, I would shy away from them. But having partnership can help you come up with a lot of capital upfront because you have a shared bucket of money that is more than what you would have come up with by yourself. So you may want to consider partnerships. Personally, they're not for me. Another part is, of course, leasing. Lease to buy, lease to own, all these are options of property ownership that you can do. Anytime you buy land, just make sure that, is it a leasehold land? Are you leasing it? Or is it a freehold? Are you owning it? You really need to consider that when you're buying property in Kenya. I'm going to wrap this video here. Today we covered topics about, do you really need a home in Kenya? We skipped buying versus building a home. That's covered in the previous video. And then we deep dived into the different types of property ownerships you can have in Kenya. We talked about high-rise apartments, freestanding home, commercial buildings. We talked about partnerships. We talked about timeshare. Of all of this, the only one that I've personally invested in Kenya is the freestanding home, which is the home that I built. But I give you these options so you can make a better decision depending on your financial situation. On the next video, we are going to focus purely on how to fund your project in Kenya. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.